Hey, welcome to React Roundup, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things React related. This show is sponsored by Raygun and produced by Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoy provides remote design and software development services on a task basis, so clients only pay after the tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk about the differences between React and React Native. Also, read this as building for the web and building for native mobile applications. My name is Lucas Paganini, your host in the podcast, and joining me in today's episode are the also hosts Chris Fruen.
Hello, everybody.
Peter Osa.
Hi, everyone.
And our very special guest, Jamon Holmgren, which is the CTO and co-founder of Infinite Red, a React Native consultancy.
Yeah, hey everybody, nice to be on here.
Yeah, that was the short intro, right, Jamon? Because I could also talk about how you organize Chain React, which is one of the largest US conferences about React. And by the way, this is coming up, right? Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and where it's going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chain React is the only React Native focused conference in the US. It will be held here in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. It'll be July 17th through 19th. And so definitely check it out, chainreactconf.com. We get 300 to 500 React Native developers. It's all about React Native. We have workshops. We have obviously lots of talks from Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, I don't know, Shopify, like everybody's there. And if you want to talk or learn about React Native, it's a great place to go. And if you're a company that's looking to sponsor, we still have a few sponsorships left. They always sell out. So definitely get in touch if you're looking for that. And I'm not sure exactly when people will be listening to this podcast. Could be a little bit later, but early bird is about to expire. So if you're wanting to get a little bit of a deal, go to chainreactconf.com and get a ticket.
Awesome. And thank you for taking the time to be with us on the show. I know that you're super busy with all the content that you produce and also being the CTO and co-founder of Infinite Red. So yeah, thanks so much. And let's get into it. So we're going to talk about the differences between React and React Native, also web development versus native mobile development. So what do you think? Let's just summarize like from top of mind without going too much in depth into it, just so that we can come up with a quick list of most important things. What do you think are quick things that people should know about that are big differences between web development and just building native mobile applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people come into mobile apps thinking, well, it's an app. I've built apps before. I've even built apps for phones before, in a browser context. But it's quite a bit different. User expectations are quite a bit different. There is I think a little bit higher expectation in terms of the interactivity, being able to use your touch to be able to move things, and tap on things need to be very responsive and quick. Performance is much more sensitive, I think, with like with web, there's a little bit of forgiveness if you click on something and it loads the next page. With a mobile app, or really any kind of like desktop apps are similar, if you click on something or tap on something, it needs to be pretty instantaneously, or else people will wonder what's going on. Like, did my computer freeze, or like what happened here? So I think that's really important, and there's some tools that are built into React Native that help you with that, and not just React Native, but also the native platforms and languages that come with these mobile operating systems. So I think touch is really, really important. I think that there's also some paradigms about how you navigate and how you move around, and how like there's this concept of a stack. Like on web, you don't really have a stack of things. You navigate to a new page, versus on a mobile app, when you tap something, it'll slide on, or it'll pop on, or it'll present from the bottom like a modal, or like stacks, like almost like cards on top of each other. And so you have those. You have a lot more like tab bars. You don't have those quite. I mean, you still have tabs in some sense with web, but it's really really common on native, and there's some definite bleed between the two, but we really have to be thinking about all of those things when we're building mobile apps, because user expectations, if it feels like a website, they're going to be like, this isn't right, like, this doesn't feel like an app, it doesn't feel like the experience I expect.
And nowadays, with the hybrid technologies that are available, so we're talking React Native mostly, right? Since this is going to be the solution mostly adopted by our audience. But there are other solutions for hybrid development too nowadays. My main question would be, is it possible to get to the state where it is as good as an app that was built for native, or are we always going to have some kind of difference just because of the technologies being used?
I think that's a great question too, because there has been a movement toward, like, let's converge these technologies. Let's make sure that everything is pretty well the same stuff. And I get that. I get why there's a motivation to do that. And React Native is a step that direction for sure. But with that said, it does feel like there's always going to be some differences between the two. There's always going to be some differences in the user expectations. Although web continues to get better, it gets better at things like touch and interactions in those ways, animations and whatnot. So, web is certainly moving that direction, but I always think of web as being really two platforms in one. You have sort of a document like platform for viewing web pages and reading documents. And then you have that web app platform. And those are two different things, and they have two different needs. On mobile, we just have apps. Like the document stuff we would pull open in a browser and read. But if you're talking about a native app, it's an app. And so everything is geared toward an app. So it's all around interactivity and responsiveness and sort of like authoring and content like manipulation rather than consuming. Although obviously there's plenty of apps that consume as well. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I think that the fact that web is always has to support both of those things will always have an effect.
Awesome. So let me try to make my question a little bit less abstract and try to bring it to a more concrete example. You had years of experience with React Native and just hybrid technologies, right?
Yeah. We started when React Native came out in 2015. So almost 9 years ago now.
Awesome. And do you also have experience building with just regular native technologies?
Before that, for about 3 years, we were from 2012 to 2015, we were doing, so my previous company, we were doing native apps, and it was mostly iOS. And actually in 2015, early 2015, our clients started asking us for Android apps, because I don't know if you all remember, but back then, a lot of times people would just build iOS apps and they would just totally neglect Android. And you'd be like, well, when's your Android app coming out? Well, we might do it eventually. But eventually it was like, okay, we can't ignore this anymore. We do need to start, putting out an Android app. And so we were starting to we start building some Android apps, and we're not super fond of the experience. Like iOS was a little better. And then React Native came out and we started looking at it. And my business partner, Todd Worth, actually looked at it first, and he's like, hey, this is pretty good. If they come out with an Android version, because at that point they only had iOS, if they come out with an Android version, we should really look at it seriously. And then in September they came out with the Android version, and they released that as open source. And in October we adopted it, and that's when it's also when Infinite Red was born, because Todd and I had been kind of friends for a long time, and we decided to merge our companies, and that's when it happened. It was in October of 2015. So at that point we're like, well, we're merging our companies together. This is a good time for like a clean break. We're all in on React Native.
Awesome. Gotcha. So you have experience with both scenarios. And now trying to bring my early question to a more concrete example. Nowadays, is there any situation that you can think of that you would recommend to a client to not use a hybrid technology and instead build with native technologies?
Yeah. So this is a question we get from time to time. And I think the answer is when you really would never have a use for deploying to other platforms. If you're only ever going to be deploying to iOS, or only ever going to be deploying to Android, then using the native technologies on that platform usually makes sense. Not always. Sometimes it still makes sense to use React Native. And I actually, so Orta Thorax, sorry, I actually don't know how to pronounce his last name. Orta, he's known as Orta online, ORTA, legendary developer, one of the ones who kind of like created CocoaPods, which is sort of the package manager for iOS developers. I don't know if he created, but he's one of the ones who like maintained it for many years. He is probably one of the best iOS developers that on the planet, and he decided to use React Native for an iOS only app. And I was blown away. I was talking to him about this at React Native EU in 2019. And he said, yeah, I think the experience is good. Now, I don't know if that would change with Swift UI, because Swift UI kind of came out of Swift UI is a response to React and React Native. It was basically like, well, we need some sort of a declarative syntax like this too. So it's basically Swift's like version of React built into Swift. But at the time he said, yeah, it's just a better experience to use React Native. And so there are some times, but that can be a situation where you do. Anytime you're deploying to more than one platform, that might be iOS and Android, it might be iOS and web, it might be all three, it might be TV, it might be desktop. Anytime that you have more than one platform, the business case for React Native starts getting very, very strong. It starts getting very strong, and it's hard to really overstate how impactful having a common technology can be. I think people a lot of times go into this with, they're sort of like trying to temper their expectations a little bit and like, well, maybe if we get some code reuse, then it'll be a win. It's much more than code reuse, a lot more than that. It affects your whole organization. I remember Squarespace, when they adopted React Native, they actually went and redesigned the whole floor on their office. This was pre-pandemic, the whole floor, to change where their developers sat in their office because of React Native. Because like they used to have these different pods, like they'd have iOS and Android and web, and they just moved them together, and they're like, we need you all to be close to each other.
Cool. Okay. So that's a very so that tells me that there are really no technical reasons for someone to choose to use a native technology nowadays. Like in the sense of there's just something that I cannot build without using native technologies. It's really just a matter of if you're only going to support that platform, which seems to me that it would be a bad decision either way, right? Because you're kind of like making a decision now that if you want to change it 2-3 years in the future, then you're just stuck with it and you're never going to be able to change. So that seems like a weak reason to go with a particular, to go with just native technologies, unless like the rest of your team has a lot of experience on that, which then it's another complete different reason, right? It's like we're going to go way faster using that because we already have experience with that. But assuming that everyone has the same level of experience, and maybe that's zero experience, then it would probably be a safe bet to say that people should always use hybrid development platforms nowadays, because there's simply nothing that you can't do that would require you to not be in such hybrid platforms.
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and I think that what people don't realize is that a React Native app is an iOS native app, and it is an Android native app. You literally have iOS native and iOS native or Android native folders in your project, and you can go in there and run them with Xcode. You can run them with Android Studio. And if you want to build something in native, literally just build it in native. It's right there. Like, it's not that hard to do. So anything you can do in native, you can do in React Native projects because they have a full native setup there. Now, the second question when I tell people this is, well, then what's the point of using React Native? Why wouldn't I just use the native platform if I'm already going to be using? Well, it's because you're only really doing that in like 2% of cases. Like you build out like 2% of your screens in native if you want to. Like if there's some critical interaction that you don't think you can achieve with React Native, you build that screen, and then you just bring it into React Native and run it. And since everything in React Native actually boils down to a native view, a UI view on, like UIKit on the iOS side and the Android layout system in the Android side, I mean, it just fits right in. There's like literally you can go in there and inspect and see how they all fit together in like the view hierarchy inspector and stuff in Xcode. So because of that, I always say there's nothing that a native and an iOS or Android developer can do that we cannot do. And I think some native developers who are a little bit stuck in their ways take offense to this, and they're like, "Hey, you can't say that because you're just saying like we'll use native." It's that interaction between the two that I think makes React Native so powerful. With that said, we've done almost 80 React Native projects, and they're not small; they're big projects, like companies you've heard of. In the vast majority of those projects, we've done almost zero or even zero native code. Vast majority of them. There have been a few where we've had to do maybe up to 10% native code. I don't think we've ever had a project with more than 10%, other than the brownfield projects, which is a different story. And I can talk about brownfield if you want, but what brownfield is it's an existing iOS or Android app that we're adding React Native into to develop an experience within the app. But that's a different story. But yeah, any greenfield like built from the ground up, 90% is like bare bones bottom, and most of them are like 99 to 100% React Native code.
Okay, let me jump into that brownfield example just quickly, because I think it's interesting for people to at least know that this is possible, right? So if you get an app that was originally built just for iOS or just for Android using native technologies, how hard is it for you to gradually adopt React Native without just having to fully migrate everything to it?
This is where I'm going to shamelessly plug using a consultant, especially my company, Infinite Red. I think that's when you really need a consultant, because it's not easy. It's what React Native was designed for. So React Native is actually very good at brownfield, but the process of doing that is tricky. You need to do it right, and it's easy to do it wrong. And it's easy to do it in a way that blows up your bundle size without really getting the benefit of of what React Native brings to your app. So there are right ways and wrong ways to do this, and they always depend on your architecture. So there's not like one blog article or one video you can watch to like get the answer for this. It's very dependent on context, and I would recommend using a consultant there. But if you're dead set on we can figure this out and we want to bring in React Native to build out some experiences within the app, React Native is totally capable of that. And in fact, it was originally built that way. And Meta, for example, in the Facebook app, which is the biggest app that they own, that is how they use it there. So like some of the comment sections are React Native. The marketplace section, like if you go to that in the tab, you'll see that that's all React Native. But it's but the rest, there's kind of a mix and match of native and React Native views, but they're continuing to kind of build out more and more of their apps functionality in React Native. They have other apps that are fully built in React Native, but that's a good brownfield example. There's also Amazon is doing a lot of brownfield with React Native, and we are working with a lot of the companies that are doing brownfield with large companies that are doing that. So it's been interesting. There are some downsides to doing brownfield for sure. It's certainly a lot nicer to do greenfield, to do kind of like you're from the ground up in a lot of ways, but totally possible. And there are some advantages.
Okay. Chris, Peter, I have thousands of other questions, but I also wanted to give the floor to you guys a bit. Like I've been making questions for 20 minutes, and I want to make sure that if you guys also have questions, you have an opportunity to make them. So.
All right, on Jamon, right? I think I have a question. I think this is probably a popularity question, right, on React Native. So a lot of people say like I usually go on Stack Overflow, Quora, Reddit, and they will say like React Native is kind of very buggy. Let me use that word. That's what many of them would say. Many of them would complain that oh, there's these compatibility issues with Android, with iOS. I have to fix this 80% of the time. I have to do this. I have to do that. So I don't know. Do you have a comment for what could be the like maybe you I don't know, maybe give an advice on that aspect, or is it something like a skill issue? Maybe probably don't know their way around React Native or so, or probably maybe there's actually maybe something we need to know about maybe React Native in terms of performance or so. Yeah, I think that's basically my
Peter,
question.
I'm having trouble hearing you. It's coming through kind of garbled. If you want to
Yeah.
put it in chat, I could maybe answer then. I think that your internet's going out or something right now, at least
Okay.
on my end.
Oh, Lucas, can you hear me or you can't?
I can hear you, but yeah, it is a bit muffled. So what I understood from Peter's question, and Peter, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was mainly with regards to the popularity of
Mm,
React Native versus other hybrid solutions.
yeah.
Is that correct, Peter? Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
know that
Perfect.
Flutter is rocking too, right? It's still
Yeah.
pretty high in terms of usage. So how does the hybrid technology landscape looks like at the moment?
Yeah. So Flutter is more popular outside of the US than it is inside the US in a lot of ways. And I think this is because in a lot of ways Flutter works best with Android. And React Native works best with iOS. Uh, this is continuing to change for both of them. They're both trying to make the other platform experience better. But in the US, the iOS market is kind of the primary one. That's where people tend to make more money. It tends to be a little bit more affluent user base, that sort of thing. Outside of the US, most countries people use Android pretty heavily, and because of that, Flutter is pretty popular. Um, but in absolute terms, React Native is still pretty far ahead of Flutter, even worldwide. If you look at, so there are some kind of biased metrics out there, and you'll see Flutter is more popular than React Native, and it's kind of like it comes from a company that does Flutter or something like that. But if you look at there was actually Evan Bacon actually recently did a survey of the App Store, and he looked at the top apps, and in many different categories, React Native was 10 to 20 times more represented in the top 100 apps than Flutter. And so there's still a pretty wide gap there. React Native has the benefit of keying off of the React community, and the React community is gigantic, huge. Obviously, your podcast audience here is a good representation of that. Most of you all do React. And so stepping into React Native is a pretty short step. Moving into Flutter is a much bigger step. So there's really not a lot. I wouldn't say there's like anything wrong with Flutter necessarily. There's some philosophical differences in how they approach things, and I wrote all about the differences between React Native and Flutter in my article titled "Flutter is Better Than React Native in All the Ways That Don't Matter." And I go into the ways that Flutter is better than React Native, and it is better than React Native in some ways, and why those ways don't matter because of the things that do matter. And it really comes down to things like ecosystem, developers sharing code. It's a lot of non-technical reasons. In the technical reasons, they're actually quite close. And Flutter tends to beat it a little bit in developer experience. And React Native tends to beat it in a lot of ways that have to do with sharing code with web and sharing knowledge with web and stuff like that. But neither of those things are like React Native and Flutter. If you take the developer experience, they're pretty close. Flutter's just little bit better, I think, in some things. So as long as you're not like, you have to have the most incredible, like fine tune that one thing. If that's the only thing that matters to you, then maybe Flutter's for you. But if you take it holistically, that's sort of why I think React Native still continues to hold an edge.
Gotcha. Okay. I really want to get into differences within deployment, but before that, Chris, what about you? Do you have any questions you'd like to make?
Sure. Yeah. I have a few. I guess the first one kind of goes into, I think, what Peter mentioned is that, there are some kind of discussions always that React Native sometimes does feel buggy or something like that. And I have some experience with that. I was kind of the leader of a native app for almost 2 years. And I think what it comes down to is, and sometimes I think one of the small disadvantages of React Native is you have, like, let's say you need to get like contacts from a phone, right? And of course there's a library for it, but then you're kind of dependent on that library, right? And which is usually fine, it works fine, but with the pace that React Native updates itself, or the versions change, and then you might get some dependency issue, and so I think that may be where this kind of notion comes from. And I think, just speaking from my experience, you have to be very careful with the libraries you choose, and also know the dependencies that they're using. But I would love to hear kind of what your experience is with that, and I guess over in general, just how, like, this dependency management with React, because I think it's a bit more, I don't want to say complex, but you just have to be a bit more careful than like with NPM, like on a web project where you can just usually these days install everything and it works fine.
Yeah. So there was some choppiness there too. I don't know if it's on my end. Lucas, were you able to hear everything that Chris said?
Yeah, I was. I think that in this case, it was actually on your end.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah. But were you able to understand?
I was able to get most, or the gist of it. I think it was, if I get this right, Chris, hopefully, the performance, sort of like the feel of React Native, feeling native versus feeling like a React Native app, as people say, and also sort of the dependency on third-party libraries and the state of the third-party library ecosystem. Was there anything else in there that I missed that was important to answer? Because I can certainly go through those.
No, just mainly like how you think about, or how you tackle dependency management in React Native.
Dependency management. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So we hear this sometimes, or actually quite often, around, like, I can feel like it feels like a React Native app. It feels like it's not native. And generally speaking, when people say that, I do kind of know what they mean. Like, there can be situations where things can feel not buttery smooth, or they don't feel smooth, or if they have issues, they don't feel like they have issues in the same way that native apps have issues, because native apps obviously still have issues. But really, when it comes down to it, you have to look at each app. So I'll tell you a little story. We had one of our clients is Gas Buddy here in the US. It's an app that allows you to find fuel prices around the US, and you can often save like 20% if you just drive a mile out of your way to go to a different gas station to fuel up. And of course, in the US, we all use cars to get everywhere, and that's kind of important. And so their main fuel feed, where you would like scroll, originally the app was iOS and Android native. When we moved to React Native, we wanted to maintain the feel, the performance, everything needed to feel the same. We were just replatforming onto React Native. And the main feed was really choppy. It was like you'd like scroll and it'd just be like chop, 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 and stalling, whatever. And we're like, what is going on here? Like, is this a problem? So we actually like did a bunch of performance optimizations to the React Native code that we had for the list view, for flat list there. I think we started using flash list for a while, and we had to back out of that because there were some downsides to flash list that we couldn't totally solve. And what it came down to though was the native ad, like the ads that were in the feed, which were native code, were the ones with the performance problem. We went in there and optimized the native code, and then the list was smooth and felt native. So it wasn't even our code. It wasn't even React Native code. It was an ads platform that was causing the problem. And so if someone were to use that app, knowing it's a React Native app, and someone who's skeptical of React Native, they might go in there and be like, this app sucks. It feels like React Native. It feels like it's not native, not knowing that it's the native code that caused the problem, And so often our biases kind of come into this. So you have to look at each individual situation and say, what caused the performance issue? And so definitely something to keep in mind. I know that we can achieve totally, buttery smooth performance on React Native, and we've done it many, many times. A good example of this is Mercari. Mercari is sort of like an eBay competitor. It's one of our clients as well. We helped build the app. We put a whole bunch of time into that along with their team. And they had 4.8 stars, average 4.8 stars with their older like native app, and with literally millions of reviews. And we're like, we can't go from that to something less. It has to maintain 4.8 average stars. And since we launched the new React Native, 4.8 stars over the last 2 years, and it's maintained that. So people are very happy with it. It's buttery smooth in pretty much every case. And when it's not, we can go in and fix it. There's ways to fix it. And so that's a really, really, you just have to, at the end of the day, performance always comes down to someone caring and putting in the time. That's really what it is. And all of the tools are there to do it. Third-party dependencies is actually a very good question. That's something that I think probably is one of the more, it's both a strength and a weakness of React Native, because you have a vast ecosystem of third-party libraries, but that also means you have a vastly different level of quality across these different libraries. And if you're relying on a library and it's not maintained, or something changes and you got to go in and like patch it, that can be kind of annoying. But the benefit is you don't have to write it in the first place, because it's there and someone did write it, and there's a huge ecosystem of that. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. I will say that Expo, the company Expo, and also the kind of ecosystem around Expo, they tend to have the most high quality React Native libraries, and you can use Expo libraries in a regular React Native app without using Expo across everything. And so everything we do pretty much brings in Expo libraries, and those are they're well maintained, they're really set up well, and well designed. So that has really helped a lot. Basically, Expo has become the de facto kind of caretaker of the third-party ecosystem for stuff that really matters. I think that's kind of the main thing. We still use things like CocoaPods and Gradle and stuff on the native side. So if you need something, a third party from that side, we can always bring it in. There's also some really interesting things coming up with the new architecture, and there's been some experiments with integrating native script with React Native. So native script is very interesting. Actually, you should probably you pay attention over the next few months, because there's going to be some new announcements coming out where you can actually access native APIs directly in your JavaScript code just by basically importing them and writing them out and just using them in a way that's really cool, that native script has had for a while. Native script kind of works this way. It binds things automatically. So you have all these bindings just automatically, and then you can use them in your React Native JavaScript code without incurring a cost, because it's going to go over the JavaScript interface, the JSI. So instead of going over the bridge and doing a bunch of serialization, a bunch of like overhead, it's literally just calling from your JavaScript engine, Hermes or JSC, but usually Hermes, directly into the native code. So it literally just passes like the execution pointer over there, shares memory. It sounds dangerous. It's a little dangerous, but it works really well. And you can essentially access the same memory and call the same APIs in your native code directly from your JavaScript code. So stuff like that's going to be a pretty big deal when it lands, because that will really like eliminate that barrier between native and JavaScript.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I remember that's sometimes the issue, is that if you're relying on that one library that has that one bridge, and then if they change React Native or something changes, then the whole thing breaks. But that's quite cool. I also have kind of like a joke follow-up question, because when I last used React, it was like, I think 0.62, and I think they're already on 70 or something. Do you think it will ever become a 1.00 software?
I tweeted out this meme a while back, which is the guy who's like looking in anticipation. It's 2 frames. One, like, and it was like, it said the title was React Native 0.99. He's like this. And then the second one is him just kind of like, and it says React Native 0.100. And he's just kind of dejected. Like, oh, I thought it was going to be 99 1.0. Really, so the new architecture is landing in the next one, 0.74. I mean, it landed before, but it'll land like by default. So the new architecture has been like 2 years in the making, maybe longer actually. I think it's been longer. And so that is a really key part. We really can't get to 1.0 until the breakage stops. And that has been the big thing. I know like other frameworks will just like roll out 1.0 and then just do 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 and break things all the time. With React Native, they really want to get to a point where they can commit to backwards compatibility. And this is true of React as well. You can run like class-based components in a React app, which hasn't been around for years, in terms of what they recommend. But when hooks came around, and even when they move on to like React server components and stuff, they're going to maintain that backwards compatibility. It's really important. Like backwards compatibility is really important to the React team. So React Native, until they can like commit to saying this is going to be backwards compatible, they don't really want to go to 1.0. But there is a roadmap now, and it is starting to take shape. And so I think that's going to be coming in hopefully pretty soon. But yeah, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. It's probably about time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So let's see if we can talk a bit about deployment too, because I think this is a gigantic challenge for people that think, oh, I have web development experience. This is called React Native. I know React, so I can just build a native app. And then they realize how different the deployment process is. It's just we're so used to deploying API changes at the same time as the front end and just expect everyone that is running the front end to be running the latest version, which is compatible to the latest API version. And that's simply not the case with installable applications. You can have clients that are using a version of your application from 1 year ago, and they are simply not going to update. So you have to decide, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to support some very old versions of the backend API? Are you just going to require them to update? So there's so many challenges that come with that. So I would like to hear a bit from you. How do you recommend web developers to think about this different way of deployment and updating process? And also, if there is currently any way for us to have the cake and eat it too, right? Can we currently have an installable application that would be kind of like a PWA, in the sense that it would be installable, but at the same time, it would always get the latest versions of the of the web assets from a server, and then it would always be running the absolute latest without users having to manually update.
I love this question. And settle in because we got a few things. I know we're going over time here. I'll go as quick as I can. So first off, you have the App Store and the Play Store, and those have a review process. And this is one of the things where people, web developers, correctly have a criticism of native apps. It's a walled garden. Google and Apple control it, and they will sometimes deny your app for the dumbest reasons, absolute dumbest reasons. One of my friends just had his app denied with a very small bug fix for some massive policy violation that's not even true, does not even exist in his app. But they have denied him 6 times now for a policy violation that does not exist in his app. It's not there. He keeps saying, it's not there. Show me where it is. And they just keep saying, we're not going to approve this because you have this thing in your app that you can't have. He's like, I've had these situations myself. Very frustrating. So that is a very good criticism of native apps that pushes people toward PWAs and things like that, even though users don't want PWAs, but that's a whole nother discussion. So that's a big one. You have to abide by their rules. You do get some value out of the review process, though. There's some QA-ish stuff, like, does your app even start? I've submitted apps that break right away, and they've caught it. And I'm embarrassed, but at least they caught it, right? The downside also is the turnaround time. So this is not just, hey, we broke the build, let's push up a new version, now we're good. Or revert or whatever. So that can be, I mean, sometimes, a day, sometimes it's a week, and you just have no control and no transparency into that. You can expedite on the Apple side, which sometimes works, and you can't expedite on the Google side. There's just no way. So a lot of frustrations on that side of things. You have a different build process. You're creating native binaries. Not all native binaries are the same between different devices. They have to be, customized. So those things all have to be kind of built in. And like you said, Lucas, there's older versions that can be out there. So you have to handle that in your application code. You have to reach out to the API and say, what version are you expecting? What's the lowest version you can, accept? If it's beyond my current version, I need to pop up a message to the user saying, hey, we're really sorry, but we no longer support this version. Go to your App Store or Play Store and update, please. Which is very frustrating with people with older devices that can't. It doesn't support it, right? But so it's something to keep in mind. React Native does support pretty old versions, though, itself. And then the over-the-air updates is kind of a big one. So in the past, because you ship a either JavaScript bundle or a Hermes bytecode bundle, those are roughly equivalent. Hermes bytecode is binary and is built for Hermes. And the other one would be a JavaScript bundle, which would look a lot like what you would ship on web, but it's just one file, customized for React Native. You can replace that. So you can actually reach out to a server and you can say, hey, I need a new bundle. Download it, hot swap it over, and restart your app. Yeah, like internally restart it. And now you're running on the new bundle. There are ways you can either do this manually, literally just download it yourself and do your own swaparoo, or you can use things like EAS update, Microsoft Code Push, which is going away, by the way, in a year. So you don't want to use that anymore, but it used to be a big thing. I think there's some other options too. We haven't really used them. We've either hand rolled our own, used Microsoft Code Push, or used EAS update. And so that can replace your whole bundle. And that's like a complete it's downloading everything. You can't change native code that way. Not only technically, but also it's against the App Store rules. So replacing the JavaScript or Hermes bytecode bundle is fine. Replacing native code or compiled code is not fine. And then lastly, in the future, you're going to be able to do this per component. And that's through React Server Components. So React Server Components is going to allow you to just replace certain components as you go. And it's going to get much closer to what you're talking about there. about having kind of more real time kind of web feel to it, where when you go to a new component, it's going to have all the latest and greatest updates. So that's kind of the landscape. It's headed that direction, and it's also something that Flutter can't do. It's something that Kotlin multi-platform can't do, and it's something that native really can't do either. None of those other competitors can do over-the-air updates. It's just not. It's like Flutter. The Flutter's team has looked at it and basically said, we're not going to support it. It's just not going to be possible because of the architecture. It's actually probably React Native's most killer feature if you really boil it down, over the air updates.
Gotcha. And you were saying that users don't really want PWAs, and although from a developer's perspective, they do help a ton if you're just a web developer wanting to have something installable. Do you think that this is changing over time? Because like as a user, it's not that I don't want a PWA, is that I don't want a different installing process. That's it.
Yes, correct.
I don't really care if it's a PWA, if it's a complete native app, if it's a hybrid. I really don't mind what is being used internally. I just don't want to have an installment process that is different from what I'm used to, which is going to the App Store and downloading it from there.
Yeah.
But other than that, I really don't care. And in that sense, can't we just have an app shell that simply exposes a web view internally, and then you have the best of both worlds? Is that possible?
So Expo kind of tried this, where they built sort of a shell that you could load in different apps, and it was a really cool idea that Apple shut down. They just said, no, we're not going to allow this. And this may take some regulation, because Apple has every incentive to keep people going through their app store and paying them 30%. And they're extremely, not only are they resisting governments or resisting doing this themselves, they're resisting governments doing this. So they'll do it in a way that is like the most barely compliant but worst possible user experience possible. And it's really, really frustrating. I agree with you, Lucas. If you could go to the App Store and hit install, and an icon pops up on your desktop, and when you tap it, it's a PWA and a thin shell, nobody would care. Nobody would notice, right? Other than the fact that maybe the experience isn't quite what they want because it's a web view. That's, that could change. I think it's better on Android. PWAs are much better on Android on iOS. So if you talk to someone who's an iPhone user, they're going to say PWAs suck, because they do. If you talk to an Android user, they're going to say PWAs are okay, because they are. And so that's kind of like the difference between the two. Anytime you see someone saying PWAs suck, they're an iPhone user. You know it. And anytime that you see people advocating for PWAs, it's going to be probably an Android user. So that just seems to be kind of a differentiation there. Google also likes their 30%, but they're a little bit less reliant on it than Apple is. And so Apple is just fighting tooth and nail to keep them out of the App Store and keep them, from being easy to install and stuff like that. So on the other side of things, let's just take all of that out of it. I do think that the experience of using native views is important, because you can ship an app to the App Store that is just a web view. And I've done it before, where it's just a web view and then you just use everything in a web view. And I just don't think that the experience is quite there. That's why React Native exists, because then you can create native views and native experiences using web technologies, but not a web view.
Gotcha. Okay. And currently there isn't any framework out there that just relies on this structure. Like it's just it just serves a web view and wraps your app and generates binaries.
There's Cordova and there's Ionic, and back in the day there was PhoneGap, and those things all they have that philosophy, and there are apps that use it. Generally speaking, the experience is not, you're just not able to deliver the experience that a high-end app would really want. I don't think we could have shipped Mercari using the WebView approach. I just really don't think it would have worked. The quality just wouldn't have quite been there, even with capacitor, which capacitor is very good on the ionic side. They have done really the best possible job with a WebView that you can do. You really can't get better than the ionic capacitor approach. It's just an inherent limitation of the technology, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. And also, even if we were to use them, from my understanding, they don't download the files remotely, right? You would be generating a binary that has the files from the build from that particular moment in time. So if you were to generate a new version and put it on your web domain, it's not like all the Cordova applications would download from it and serve. They would still be serving the old version that has the web assets bundled with it.
Yeah, that is correct. Although you can update it, but yes, that is correct. That's actually that was a decision that they made just for startup time, making sure startup time isn't too slow.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
think we should start wrapping up. That was a lot, and there's still so much more that we could talk about. So I'd be happy to do a part two anytime.
sure.
But yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Jamon. And let's do some promos. Why don't you start and tell us some of the things that you'd like to promote?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, Chain React, our conference, please do check it out, chainreactconf.com. Tickets are if you're still listening to this now here in kind of late April, you should still have a couple days left to buy early bird tickets. Otherwise, the price goes up a little bit. So try to sneak that in now. But either way, it's still worth it. 300 to 500 React Native developers in Portland, Oregon, July 17th through 19th. It's a 2-day conference, but there's a day of workshops. There's a beginner, intermediate, and advanced workshop there. So you can get any of those workshops. We redid them. The intermediate one is actually going to be taught with Expo. So Expo staff are going to be there teaching the intermediate workshop. Also, React Native Radio is my podcast. So if you, obviously you're listening to this amazing podcast, but also if you want to get more React Native in your feed, go subscribe to React Native Radio. That's reactnativeradio.com. And that we're coming up on episode 300 now of that episode of that podcast. And then lastly, of course, my consultancy, infinite.red. We are 30 people, mostly in the US, almost all in the US. And we only do React Native. So if you need some help with your React Native project, hit me up either on social media or just send me an email, jamon@infinite.red. Happy to chat about your project, see if it's something we can help with. We're all senior level. We're all very senior. This is like a spec ops, like highly skilled team. And you want us to come in, put a team of 2 people guiding your team. It'll go much faster, go much better. It'll be more maintainable long-term. We have customers who have been with us for almost a decade. People tend to stick with us once they start using us just because of the high quality. So check us out, infinite.red.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to promote the 2 companies that produce the show. So again, Top and Devs, for anyone who wants to learn more about just software development in general. There are so many other podcasts available at Top and Devs, not just about React, but also about Angular, which I host myself, and several other topics such as DevOps and machine learning, etc. And also for anyone who is interested. So Jamon was plugging his consultancy. And for anyone who is looking for something more focused on just regular web development, and we also have Envoy, So unvoid.com. So if you're interested in that, the differences between Envoy and other software development and design consultancies is that you only pay after the work is delivered and approved. So you have predictable costs because you know beforehand how much each task is going to cost. And you also have predictable quality, because if it's not up to your standards, you can just ask for changes up until you approve it, and you only have to pay after you approve. So you make sure that the quality is always going to be on par with your expectations. So if you're interested in that, do check out envoy.com. And yeah, these are going to be my promos for today. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I think this week I'm gonna actually promote a React Native related tool, not mine, but this is Fastlane, and I'm sure Jamon, you've heard of this one. It's an amazing it's an amazing tool. I mean, you can, when they say like it helps you automate Android and iOS, you can go even down to the screenshots of what you upload to Google Play. So it's an amazing tool that can help you deploy your apps. Maybe something for another episode at some point for us to discuss.
Absolutely. We've used them for years and years, and it's amazing.
Awesome. And Peter, how about you?
Oh yeah, this week I don't have anything this week. But yeah, I will probably in the future. I have a course coming up, but yeah, more details will be given. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're gonna finish this episode, and just to have this registered on our actual show, for those of you that might not see this comment, we got a comment from Polar Nights, which I think is just brilliant and super funny. He was saying, as a barber, I love that this is like the perfect evolution of beard growth. So we have from Chris to Jamon to me and to Peter, the perfect evolution of beer growth. but
I love it.
yeah, super funny comment. Yeah, so guys, thank you so much for being on the show. For the audience, thank you so much for sticking up to the end. That was a very long one, so I appreciate your attention. I hope you extracted a lot of value. I'm eager for the part 2 with Jamon whenever we have time. But also, if you want more content about React and just pick Jamon's brain, in the meantime, definitely check out some of the conferences that he's going to be part of. So React Conf and also Chain React. Don't forget to check those out if you're interested in that. And well, have an excellent week, and I will see you in the next episode.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks a lot.